Greetings to all our subscribers, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, you're truly welcome. This channel is dedicated to real American true crime stories, prison history, and forgotten cases that history tried to silence. We're grateful to every single person who listens, watches, likes, and shares these stories. Your support is the reason these voices are still being heard today. This is more than entertainment. This is history, truth, and remembrance. If you enjoy deep, well-researched true crime stories like this one, please take a moment to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to keep bringing you powerful stories that matter. And we want to hear from you. If there's a case you want us to cover, a prison story you've heard about, or a question you want answered, leave it in the comments. If you need anything at all, just tell us. We read your comments and your voice matters here. Please also share this video with someone who loves true crime. Sharing helps these stories reach people who may never have heard them before. Thank you for being part of this community. Stay curious, stay thoughtful, and we'll see you in the next story.
What you are about to hear is real, and it happened in America. These silent prisons existed before Alcatraz, and they broke men without leaving scars. If you want true crime stories that history tried to erase, subscribe now and share this story so the silence doesn't win again. The door slams shut. Not hard, not loud, just final. A man stands alone in total darkness. The air is cold. The walls are thick stone. He cannot see his hands. He cannot hear another voice. No footsteps, no keys, no sound at all. He has been ordered not to speak. If he does, punishment will come fast and without warning. Hours pass, then days, then weeks. He begins to whisper to himself just to prove he still exists. This is not Alcatraz. This is America, decades earlier. And this silence is killing him. He does not know how long he has been locked inside this cell. The guards never answer questions. Food appears through a small slot in the door. No one looks at him. No one says his name. In this prison, silence is the law. Darkness is the rule. Human contact is the enemy. Some men scream, others cry. Many stop making noise forever. But what happens next inside these silent cells will shock the nation and change American prisons forever. Before Alcatraz became famous, the United States was already running some of the harshest prisons in the world. In the early and mid-1800s, places like Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, Auburn Prison in New York, and Sing Sing became testing grounds for extreme punishment. The idea sounded simple. Silence would force prisoners to think about their crimes. Isolation would lead to regret. Darkness would bring repentance. Instead, it broke minds. At Eastern State, prisoners were locked alone for years. They wore hoods when moved so they would never see another face. At Auburn, inmates worked together but were beaten if they spoke. At Sing Sing, guards ruled with fear, and silence was enforced with violence. Doctors began to notice something terrifying. Men were shaking for no reason. Others talked to walls. Some believed ghosts lived in their cells. A few lost the ability to speak at all. Suicide attempts increased. Deaths were explained away as illness, but everyone inside knew the truth. The silence was doing the damage. Outside the prison walls, the public knew very little. These places were hidden. No cameras, no recordings, just stone buildings filled with quiet suffering. Officials called it discipline. Prisoners called it torture. One former inmate later said the silence was worse than chains, worse than hunger, worse than pain. Because pain ends. Silence does not. By the late 1800s, rumors began to leak. Visitors reported pale prisoners. Journalists whispered about madness behind the walls. Lawmakers started asking questions they had avoided for years. And then, one event inside a silent cell pushed these prisons into the spotlight. A prisoner finally broke the rule. He spoke, and the punishment that followed would expose the true cost of America's silent prisons. The sound was small, just one word. But inside the silent prison, it hit like an explosion. The prisoner had spoken. Guards rushed in. Other inmates froze in their cells, holding their breath. Everyone knew what came next. Breaking silence was not a mistake. It was a crime inside a crime. The man was dragged into the light. Witnesses later said he was shaking, not from fear, but from relief. He had finally heard his own voice. That relief did not last. Punishment was swift. At Auburn Prison in New York, silence was enforced with whips, isolation cells, and public beatings meant to scare others. At Eastern State Penitentiary, the punishment was worse. The prisoner was locked in total darkness, sometimes for weeks. No sound, no light, no human contact at all. Doctors were called only after inmates collapsed. By the 1840s and 1850s, something strange was happening across America's harshest prisons. Wardens followed the rules, but prisoners were falling apart. Men who entered strong became weak. Men who arrived healthy became confused. Some forgot their own names. Charles Dickens visited Eastern State in 1842. What he saw disturbed him deeply. He wrote that the system was slow punishment of the mind. He said the prisoners were buried alive, cut off from the world while still breathing. Still, the prisons did not change. By the late 1800s, Sing Sing prison became one of the most feared places in America. Inmates labored by day and sat in silence by night. Guards were given wide power, and abuse was common. Speaking was forbidden. Eye contact was discouraged. Complaints were ignored. Inside these walls, silence became louder than screams. Some prisoners tried to resist. They tapped on walls, they coughed in patterns, they whispered prayers. When caught, the punishment grew harsher. Solitary cells were smaller, food was reduced, time felt endless. Outside, the country was changing, cities were growing, crime was rising. Fear pushed lawmakers to support tougher prisons. Silence was seen as control. Isolation was seen as safety. But cracks were forming. Families began asking why inmates came home broken. Reporters started writing about madness behind stone walls. Medical experts warned that total isolation caused mental damage. Even some guards admitted the system went too far. Then came a death that could not be ignored. A prisoner was found lifeless in his cell. No wounds, no signs of struggle. Officials said illness, but other inmates told a different story. They said he had stopped speaking months before, stopped eating, stopped responding. He had faded away in silence. The news spread fast. For the first time, Americans began to ask a dangerous question. What if the prison itself was the punishment that killed? As pressure grew, investigators were sent inside. What they uncovered would shake public trust and force the prison system to face a truth it had hidden for decades. And once the silence was finally broken, there was no going back.
The investigators did not expect the silence to feel so heavy. When they stepped inside the prison, the air itself seemed frozen. Prisoners stood still in their cells, eyes wide, mouths closed, afraid to breathe too loudly. Guards followed every step, watching closely, saying little. But the damage could not be hidden anymore. Cell after cell told the same story. Men sat alone in darkness. Some rocked back and forth. Some stared at the walls as if something was moving there. A few did not respond at all. Doctors examined prisoners and reported shaking hands, broken speech, memory loss, and deep fear. These were not dangerous criminals anymore. They were shells of people. One doctor wrote that prolonged isolation was destroying the mind faster than any physical punishment. The public finally listened. Newspapers printed stories of prisoners who left silent cells, unable to speak to their families. Former inmates described hearing voices that were not real. Others said they forgot how to live among people. Lawmakers were forced to admit what had been denied for decades. The silent system was failing. By the late 1800s, changes began slowly. Total isolation was reduced. Some prisons allowed limited talking. Solitary confinement was no longer praised as a cure for crime. The idea that silence could save a soul was fading, but the damage had already shaped the future. Instead of ending harsh punishment, America refined it. Prisons learned which methods broke people fastest. Smaller cells, longer isolation, tighter control. These lessons did not disappear. They were stored away, waiting. Decades later, a new prison would rise on a cold island surrounded by water, Alcatraz. Officials said it was different, more controlled, more secure, but the ideas behind it were old. Silence, isolation, fear. The same tools used before, only hidden behind stronger walls. The silent cells were never gone. They had simply evolved. Today, many prisons still use isolation as punishment. Some inmates spend months or years alone. Doctors warn about mental damage, just like they did in the 1800s. Families still fight for answers. Prisoners still disappear into quiet spaces. The question remains unanswered. If silence broke men then, what is it doing now? The stone walls may have changed, the locks may be stronger, but the silence is still there, waiting. And once a cell goes quiet enough, the damage begins again. The silence never stayed behind bars. Long after the old prisons changed their rules, the damage followed the men who survived. Former inmates walked back into society, unable to sleep in quiet rooms. Some panicked in empty spaces. Others could not hold conversations without fear. The silent cells had trained their minds to expect punishment for speaking. Families noticed it first.
Fathers returned home but barely talked. Sons stared at walls for hours. Wives said it felt like living with strangers. These men were free, yet part of them was still locked inside stone rooms that no longer existed. By the early 1900s, prison officials quietly admitted what had once been denied. Total silence did not fix crime. It created new suffering. Isolation did not heal, it damaged. Reports confirmed what prisoners had been saying for years, but their voices came too late to save many lives. Some inmates never made it out. Records show prisoners who died with no illness, no injuries, and no explanation. Their bodies were buried, their stories were forgotten. The silence followed them to the grave. And still, the idea survived. When Alcatraz opened decades later, it was called modern, advanced, necessary. But inside, the same old rules existed. Limited contact, long hours alone, fear used as control. The silent cells had changed names, not purpose. Even today, echoes remain. Isolation units exist across the country. Some prisoners spend years alone. Doctors warn of the same symptoms reported in the 1800s: confusion, panic, loss of identity. The past is repeating itself, quietly. History tried to warn us. The silent prisons of the 19th century showed what happens when punishment goes too far. They proved that silence can be louder than screams, that isolation can be more damaging than chains, that breaking the mind leaves scars no walls can hold. Yet the lesson keeps slipping away. Somewhere tonight, a cell door will close softly. No shouting, no violence, just silence. And inside that quiet space, the same damage may begin again. The question is no longer what happened back then. The question is whether we are still listening now. The last door closes without noise. No slam, no echo, just a soft click that feels louder than thunder. Inside the cell, the silence returns. This is how the story ends for many prisoners, not with violence, but with quiet. The kind of quiet that presses into the chest, the kind that makes time feel broken, the kind America once believed was justice. By the time the silent prison systems faded, the truth was clear.
Silence did not fix crime, it only hid suffering. The men who lived through it carried the damage for life. The men who did not survive were erased by records that called their deaths normal. But history did not stop. The lessons from Eastern State, Auburn, and Sing Sing were never fully learned. They were stored away, reused, reshaped, different buildings, different names, same idea, control through isolation. Even today, some prisoners describe the same fear, the same loss of self, the same feeling of being buried while still alive. Doctors still warn about long-term isolation. Families still wait for answers, and cells still go quiet. The silent cells were not a mistake. They were a warning.
A warning about what happens when punishment replaces humanity, when fear replaces understanding, when silence is mistaken for order. Those early prisons were America's first experiment with extreme control. Before Alcatraz, before modern supermax facilities, before the cameras and headlines, they showed how easy it is to break a person without leaving a mark. All it takes is time and silence. Somewhere, a prisoner once tapped on a wall, hoping someone would answer. No one did. The tapping stopped. The record shows nothing more. But the silence remembers. And as long as cells exist where voices are erased, the story of America's harshest prisons is not over. It is waiting, quietly. The silence does not need walls anymore. It follows the records, the rules, the routines. Long after the old prisons were exposed, the ideas behind them survived in quieter ways. Isolation was renamed. Silence was rebranded. What once happened in stone cells now happens behind steel doors, far from public view. Former prison officials later admitted something chilling. The silent systems were never truly abandoned because they worked too well, not at reforming people, but at controlling them. Breaking a man quietly caused fewer problems than breaking him loudly. That lesson stayed. In the early 1900s, reports from doctors and investigators were filed away. Some warned that isolation caused permanent harm. Others described prisoners losing their sense of time, identity, and reality. But fear of crime was louder than those warnings, and fear always wins when silence hides the cost. Prisons expanded, rules tightened. Solitary confinement became a tool, not a mistake. Officials said it was rare, temporary, necessary. But prisoners told a different story. They described cells so quiet that their own breathing felt dangerous. Days with no voices, weeks without touch, months where time stopped meaning anything at all. Some began to talk to themselves. Others stopped talking forever. History was repeating itself. What made the early silent prison so dangerous was not cruelty alone. It was distance. The public could not hear what was happening. There were no recordings, no witnesses, just reports written by the same systems that caused the harm. That distance still exists. When silence surrounds punishment, accountability disappears. And when accountability disappears, abuse grows quietly. The silent cells taught America something uncomfortable. You do not need violence to destroy someone. You only need isolation, time, and control. That truth has never gone away. Today, debates continue. Are silent cells protection or punishment? Are they safety or suffering? The answers depend on who is speaking. Those outside hear order. Those inside hear nothing at all. And silence always sounds different from the inside.
Somewhere, right now, a cell door closes softly. A prisoner sits alone. No screams, no chaos, just quiet. The kind that stretches, the kind that waits. The same quiet that once filled Eastern State, Auburn, Sing Sing. The same quiet that history tried to warn us about. If silence could speak, it would tell us this story never ended. It only learned how to hide. If this story shocked you, someone else needs to hear it too. Share this video so these forgotten voices are not lost again. Subscribe for more real American true crime stories they never taught us. Because the truth only survives when we pass it on.